Hey guys, up till now I've shown you quite a number of classical Chinese texts, but I haven't really gotten around to show you what kind of books I read. So these are my classical Chinese books. This is part of my bookshelf, and yeah, these are the books I read. So let's start. This book at the side is called Gu Man Gunzi, and it's a huge anthology of a bunch of famous classical Chinese texts. They're arranged in historical order, so it was a pretty worthwhile read. And you might find it strange why I have an exact copy right here. And this is actually, these two are actually kind of different. This is actually a new version of this. So this includes some things that this doesn't have. So it was worth buying both of them. And here I have Seagate. In English, I think it's called The Records of the Grand Historian. This isn't the entire book itself. This is actually just part of it, the better parts of it. And it's in simplified Chinese, and yeah, I think it's a worthwhile read. And this is actually kind of like a report written by scholars on a book called Man Sam Diu Long. Found this at a super cheap price, couldn't resist buying it, but haven't really gotten around to read it, so yeah, let's leave this alone for now. This is a book on Tong Dynasty poems, Tong Si San Ba Shou, and there are a bunch of comics inside to help you understand the poems better. It's a good read. This is a book on Song Dynasty poems, and inside we have a bunch of poems. Haven't read this much, but it was really cheap. This is another book on Song Dynasty poems, and this is less about the poems themselves, and it's actually interpretations of the poems. Yeah, so we have a bunch of interpretations here. It's actually kind of boring, some parts of it, so yeah. This is another book on Song Dynasty poetry, and in case you couldn't tell by now, yes, I do like Song Dynasty poetry, and I think I've memorized about half of the poems in here. Yeah, this was a pretty good read. This is called 中國哲理語言大全. It's actually a bunch of moral tales from a bunch of different sources, and nothing too special about it, by the way. Just a bunch of stories in classical Chinese. Wait, let me put that book back in. Yeah, there we go. And this is called 中國古文鑑賞, and I read this quite a lot, as you can tell from the slightly ripped sides. And it's another anthology of a bunch of classical Chinese texts. Yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time on this. This is actually a dictionary. Yeah, 古漢語常用字字典. It's a dictionary on classical Chinese words, and it's actually really useful. I flip through this all the time. It's a great book. You should definitely buy it if you see it, and if you're interested in classical Chinese. This is 詩經通譯新傳. This is a book on詩經, or the book of poems, I think it's called in English. I don't read this quite a lot, but in some of the in some classical Chinese texts they always refer to the book of poems, and when they do, I sometimes look it up on here. So yeah, it's worthwhile. I have no idea what this is. I think I found this in my sister's room. It's just a bunch of famous texts, but you'll find most of the things you find in here in these books. So I don't really touch this quite a lot. Whoops. This is Zhongzi. I think you might have heard of it. It's a book on philosophy written by the philosopher Zhuangzi. This is Chouqi. In classical Chinese, there are two types of poems that are the two oldest types of poems. One is from Xi Ging, and the other type is from Chouqi. And if you ask me, I like Chouqi better than Xi Ging. And yeah, the poems in this book are great. You should definitely buy. If you think you're good enough in Chinese, you should definitely try reading this. This is called 世说新語, just a bunch of anecdotes of a bunch of famous historical figures. Someone gave this to me. I haven't really read it quite a lot, so yeah. This is called 文心雕龍, and it's actually a book on literary criticism, written in about 300 AD, and someone gave this to me, and I haven't really read it much. This is a book for students. Again, a short anthology of a couple of famous texts. Again, you'll find the things you'll find in here in most of these books, especially in these two. And this is a children's book on Tang Dynasty poetry, and this is an interesting book. This is a book on Chinese poetry, but there's a besides the Chinese text, there's a English translation beside it. The translation is sometimes actually pretty good. This is a book on Lok San Fu, and Lok San Fu is actually it's kind of like a poem, but not exactly. It's a kind of text type in classical Chinese, hard to explain, but yeah, this is a book on that particular piece. And yeah, you should read this if only you're pretty advanced in Chinese. So let's leave that alone. Another book on Tang Dynasty poetry. These two books are for students, and again another short anthology of a bunch of famous texts. And this is the Analects. I flip through this occasionally, but not too often. It's still worthwhile read. This is actually a history book. Samgotzi. It's about the history of a period called Samgot, and found this at a super cheap price. Couldn't resist buying it, but as you guessed, haven't really gotten around to reading it. Another book on Tang Dynasty poetry. This is a book I found in my grandpa's house. It's called Lou Ji de Ji Wei, or the Wisdom of Lao Tzu. And this is called Dai Hong and Zhong Yong. There are two really long passages inside. I think if you study classical Chinese, you may have heard of these two passages, Dai Hong and Zhong Yong. And you'll find both of them in here. And on top, another book for students, another short anthology. Nothing too special. And down here, in the middle, right between my physics books, you'll find another book on Song Dynasty poetry. And yeah, you'll find pretty simple explanations and yeah, another anthology. As you might have guessed, nothing too special. By the way, if you like physics, you should definitely read this book, Electrodynamics. Okay, back to topic. I have another book up here. It's called Xunzi Bingfa. I found this again super cheap. I've read the first chapter. Nothing too special, but yeah, it was cheap. Doesn't matter. And up here, this is a really colorful book on Tang Dynasty poetry, and another book on Song Dynasty poetry. And nothing too special about these two. This is a really awesome Chinese novel. And yeah, so here you have it. The classical Chinese books that I have. Hopefully you might find something that you want in here, and maybe you can look for it in a bookstore yourself. If you live in Hong Kong or somewhere where you can buy Chinese books. Yep. So that's my bookcase. I'll see you again sometime. Goodbye.